Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
One of my senses of the family life is that we almost expect too much from that, more than it could ever bear. Maybe that's why a lot of marriages fail, because people's expectations are too high, that they think all of their needs for intimacy, for community life, are going to be solved and met within that family structure. And I think what we're finding out in the modern world is it just won't bear that kind of weight.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is the Reverend Terry Hunt, who is the director of Levitt Square Ministries at the Trinity Episcopal Church downtown. Today, Father Bacik and the Reverend Hunt will be discussing small groups and human liberation. Now, here's Father Bacik.
Terry, I remember being on a radio program of yours a long time ago. You probably don't even remember it anymore, but you were the host, and I had a certain circumscribed role to play. And I remember fitting into that role very carefully and observing all the rules of the game as you set them up and so on. So I'm inviting you on this program with the same sort of premise. This is really the program that I'm sort of in charge of here, so you have to fit into my framework at this point. Are you willing to do that? That's what I want
the listener to understand this is an example of divine retribution.
Right.
I am being punished.
Do you remember what I was on your radio program?
Well, I vaguely remember it. I don't know what we talked about, but yes, I remember it.
Yeah, somewhat you remember.
I remember that you were on it,
yeah,
and that I was there.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah, this is unimportant at the moment, but what is important is that you and I get the chance to talk seriously here, and I will take the lead, and you can sort of fit into the conversation. And let me tell you what I want to talk about, and that is the importance of small groups in terms of the social process of dealing with modern life, of improving ourselves religiously, and so on. I think we have a really worldwide phenomenon here. I did an article recently for National Catholic Reporter, which the thesis was that when you hear people talking positively about religion these days, so often it's connected with small groups. So speaking positive about God or anything, AA meetings, people say, well, geez, I never knew so much about the mercy of God as I found out at my AA meeting. Or people would say, I was at a small mass with just 10 people in someone's home, and it was such a moving experience. Someone else would say, I'm in a Renew group in the diocese, and we get together and we talk about scriptural matters, and boy, that is helpful to me. I get a chance to express myself, and I find out more about who Christ really is for me. People go on Marriage Encounter and say, marvelous, I learned more about communication there than I've ever learned before, and how my spouse loves me. Go on and on. So often the positive statements about religion are not being in a big church, or not even so much personally, but in the small groups. And I think we have to start to look at that whole experience and analyze it a bit and see what we can learn about it.
Well, I think I don't think there's any magic in small groups per se. I think it depends on what's happening in the small groups, and that what people are using almost as kind of shorthand when they say small groups, as though the small group in and of itself are wonderful. I think what's wonderful for a lot of people is that for many of us, we don't have a whole lot of intimacy in our lives. And the normal worship service in the large church provides almost no intimacy. It provides almost no emotional release. We don't really meet each other, and we don't have an opportunity to exchange viewpoints or emotional convictions or beliefs, or to search together, or to share our lives together, really. If you just think about the way the pews are set up, we don't even look at each other. So I think the magic, if there's a magic, is that there is a need for intimacy.
Okay, let's stay with that point.
I think that everyone has a need for a certain amount of airtime, and that can happen in a small group of 10 or 12 people. Once it gets much larger than that, it cannot. There can come, therefore, a kind of affirmation if people have an opportunity to say out loud what they think and what they feel, and someone else hears them and responds to them. That's a very personal thing, to be heard and to be responded to. And that there is that potential then to create intimacy and communion, almost communion, if we can use it in a sort of horizontal sense of the word. This is missing in much of our lives. We're thrust either on a nuclear family where things are really almost too small, or we're thrust into our large group settings,
where one feels like an impersonal cog in the great wheel. I think that's a good analysis, and we probably ought to expand on it or talk more about it, that there is sort of a hunger for this greater intimacy or for community. And I think based just what you said, sort of the lack of intimacy that we find. Now, let's look at the two poles. I mean, you talked about the family. One of my senses of the family life is that we almost expect too much from that, more than it could ever bear. Maybe that's why a lot of marriages fail, because people's expectations are too high, that they think all of their needs for intimacy, for community life, are going to be solved and met within that family structure. And I think what we're finding out in the modern world is it just won't bear that kind of weight.
Can't be done.
One other person can't do it entirely for an individual.
If that were true, the other person would almost be God.
That's right.
Wouldn't he or she?
Right, and that is, I think, in a sense, the great drive is to have the other person be God and to always be there to hold us when we're feeling down or to celebrate with us when we're joyful and so on, and the other person can't do that. So I think many people are feeling the limitations of the family life. And then when you move to the larger structures, it seems to me we are caught up in this bureaucratic maze. Remember Max Weber's analysis of modern society? He talked about it in terms of the iron cage, that as bureaucratic structures got multiplied in our world, we would feel more and more hemmed in and unable to escape. And I think that's just the way many people feel. They can't get to the levers of power, can't accomplish what they want to do. I mean, there's always paperwork. There's always some bureaucrat you deal with who can't be creative in anywhere. You want your name off of a list, it can't happen. You want your check sent to a different address or something, the computer can't handle it. Well, I think all those kinds of things give us a sense of being lost in this larger kind of world. It is the iron cage of Max Weber, I think, is very real for many people. You know, there's another...
The lostness, I think, is an important...
How'd you say? What was it?
The lostness you just expressed, I think, is so important. In a sense, I almost can't know what I believe or what my values are or what's important to me unless I have some other human or humans to bounce things off from, to say them out loud, and to see some kind of response out there that comes back to me. It may confirm or reject, but at least there's some kind of response to the meanness that I have or am. And if I don't have that any place, I am lost, I think. I think the small groups provide some opportunities along these lines to begin to define oneself and one's beliefs, and to get in the sense of maybe even of what other people are believing or feeling or thinking that I can identify with or reject. And it gives me sense, even if I reject, though, of some other direction that I'm going to go in.
Yeah, sure, the challenge is important. You know, as you were describing the problem, Terry, and lostness and so on, I flashed on Kafka's The Trial, and where this guy can't even figure out what he's being tried for. He can't figure out what the charge is, and it's all amorphous. I mean, there's no clear foe to fight against in any way. It's an awful kind of situation. I remember seeing that on a stage one time and just being overwhelmed by that sense of lostness. I mean, who do you turn to? You can't even figure out what you've done wrong, let alone defend yourself. And that, I suppose, is, a heightened way that Kafka had of saying what many people feel about. There's nothing to grab onto. I think what you said very well. We can't know who we are unless we're getting feedback from other people. I mean, even talking here, I tried to tape things without somebody sitting over there, and to me, it is so hard. I can't hardly get myself to talk into a microphone unless there's some other person over there. When you're sitting there, it makes all the difference, because I can tell by your face whether I'm making sense or not, or whether you're agreeing or disagreeing, and then your words come back, and I think we end up defining ourselves. I suppose what I would add or specify in what you said about what happens in the small group, we get a lot of support, maybe affirmation, but as you suggested in your last comment, we get challenge also. And when we're challenged, then it seems to me we almost automatically begin to rethink, or we could withdraw, I'll admit, or get defensive. But if we get beyond that, we're in an automatic process of rethinking. Like, how can I refine that? How can I say it better so that it is now either understood or intelligible or acceptable to the other people in the group?
Mm-hmm.
Challenge, too.
I think one of the things I'm interested in is how these small groups are being used in Latin America, particularly in Latin America, Central America. What do they call them? Base Christian groups.
Base communities.
Base communities.
Yeah.
And there really are like thousands of them in Latin America and South America, which are like cells of a social body or organism that is loosely connected in some fashion or another, or maybe not even very definitely connected, but all arising throughout these third world countries, and happening in Africa too, in Europe to a certain extent. And they have a very definite political a dimension there, as well as putting together a political dimension and a gospel dimension.
Yes.
Now, for me, this is just fine, because to me it's absurd. Jesus didn't come to save the church, or the temple or a religious organization. He came to save the world, and the establishment that he dealt with at the time was the establishment of that world, that place. So to separate life out into something that's religious and something that's political doesn't work very well. And so that these groups are attempting to deal both from a biblical perspective and a political perspective with their lives, and the fact that they are disenfranchised and in poverty and so on.
Yes, I'm glad you raised the whole base community thing, and we ought to spend some time with that. I think many people will say, well, we can't learn anything from South America or these base communities because our situation is so different, and I think that warning is a good one. I don't think we can just take the base community idea and put it in the United States, but there certainly are things to be learned, and one of them, I believe, is the point you have raised, the interpenetration of the gospel message and an analysis of the world. They do both of those things. I remember talking to a sister one time who was in one of those base communities in Brazil, and believe me, that was a scary kind of business. This sister talked about members of their group who would just get together and read the scriptures and think about their local situation of not being able to get water into their area of the favela in which they were living, and this being such a threat to the authorities that members of their group would be tortured for being involved in that. You start to think about gospel reflection and the what it's all about and so on, and how easily we do theology, armchair theology here, and I'm, of course, into all of that. There's a price to be paid. To sit around and talk about the gospel and to be subject to that kind of repression is certainly a frightening business, but such a tribute, I suppose, to these people's faith. So they were able to bring that to bear on their very local situation of getting water or getting the mayor to do something constructive in their little area there. So both things come together, and there's this sort of prayer element, scriptural element, but also the social analysis. As we know, very often in Latin America, when the theologians get a hold of this, of course, they do it in Marxist terms, very class-oriented sort of discussion of these things. I remember a friend of mine went to teach down in one of the South American countries, and he just couldn't get over how almost all questions that arose had a class bias to them or a class interest. And he was unprepared for that. I mean, we can lecture a lot of times and without someone challenging us, well, what is your class perspective? What socio-economic class are you representing, or how are you looking at it? One of the things that we get from Latin America is this whole idea of the preferential option for the poor, that when you read the gospel from their eyes, you begin to realize how Jesus associated with the outcast, with the marginalized, the alienated, and so on, and that therefore the gospel today needs to be read from that perspective. We have to analyze the situation from the viewpoint of the poor. How does it look to them? And when you begin to do that, of course, there's a political bite to it. And there's something that surely we can learn from those people down there.
Well, yeah, the liberation theologians all seem to say God is a God of the poor. I don't know that would entirely be borne out in the New Testament, but certainly a lot of it would.
No.
I mean, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the poor. Jesus in his own response to the hungry, poor of one kind or another.
His table fellowship with the outcast.
Definitely.
By John, whether he's the Messiah or not, and we get all of the language about what's happening, how people are helped, the poor have the gospel preached to them, the captives are freed.
Right.
Interesting. There's a lot when you start looking at it, and of course that's what the liberation theologians do for us. But these small groups that we're talking about actually do it in the concrete. They're not sitting there writing books about it. They're meeting in somebody's little hut with the scriptures in their hand and talking about how they can improve their local situation. And that seems to be one of the things we could well learn from this. Johannes Metz, the greatest disciple of Karl Rahner, has said that the small groups are going to cause a new reformation in the Christian world. And it's going to help reform both the Protestant world and the Catholic world. And that what we're going to learn is how to join mysticism and politics, how to join prayer life with an attempt to improve the socio-economic situation, and that the small groups are in a position to do exactly that.
I don't have any idea what he means about joining mysticism and politics
well,
and so on, but
of that
I guess I want to come back and ask you about that in a second. But I think that what is translatable, it seems to me, from the third world countries to you and to me and to other people here in Toledo, is a sense that there is a way in which small groups can empower people to discover what their values are, who they are in relationship to other people, what's important to them and is not important, because there is simply the opportunity, if this thing is run properly, for people to encounter each other, to share, and to begin to discover more clearly what's important to them and what isn't. And I suspect that that's one of the things that happens if you were to go to South America. I think I'd probably see people coming into a small base Christian community of a very small number of people. I think I'd see people come in who'd been beaten down all their lives and had little sense of their own value or importance, and gradually and slowly beginning to dialogue with each other and beginning to find out that, lo and behold, they had some thought that was of value to someone else, and could understand something that someone else cared about, and would gradually and slowly begin to discover themselves as a real, live human person.
Sure, and that same thing can happen in the United States without the use of Marxist categories.
It doesn't have anything to do with it.
No.
One way or the other.
That's right. You can get people together in our city to begin to talk about the relevance of the gospel to their business life, to their social life, to the life of our community here, and so on.
I think what this small group could chiefly do is to ask us to take each other seriously.
Oh, well put, yeah. Yes. And then, therefore, we would...
That would be revolutionary.
Sure.
If we really took each other seriously, I mean, if we really met each other, and so I think most of the time, I haven't really met most of the people who are around me. I don't really know them.
No, I think that, too...
There's a hunger for that.
Yeah, there's a hunger for that, and there's also a need, then, to translate this into action. I often contrast we had in the days in the 60s, we had very popular the Christian family movement, people who got together, small groups in one another's home, they read the Bible together and tried to get some action that would flow from it, and they analyzed some problem in the community, and they had to do an action to help the problem in the community, and then they reported back to the group next 2 weeks or month, however often they met. And that, to me, was such a healthy movement. It got away from what I often call a group narcissism, where everyone just looked at themselves and talked about their own problems or their own relationships, which so often happens. That was a very healthy movement. And again, it tried to combine. You said, well, what do you mean by mysticism and the prophetic dimension and so on? What I mean by that is that it brings together the scriptural world, the world of prayer, of private piety in a way, with the whole business of action in the world. The internal and the external are brought together in some way, and I don't think they need to be separated. I think they can be brought together in one's own life. So mysticism was a broad word that Metz used to describe, I suppose, the whole development of the spiritual life. And I believe that we need to work at that, because many of the small groups in the United States, I think, right now end up being more the prayer group type, without much social action, without much going beyond the group. So people can sit around and say, aren't we neat because we pray together, or gives us a glow as we offer our praise to God, and that's surely a good thing. I don't want to knock it, but it seems to me we got to go beyond that to have a fuller human life, and to make the community small groups effective. They need to have a task or an interest in the world or a political social dimension.
Well, I think we've lived through, probably you and I, a relatively comfortable time, at least in the 50s, and maybe well beyond that. Most of us who are middle class or above or near it have lived in a fairly comfortable time, and maybe haven't had to do all that much to change our own world. I suspect that if you and I were living in South America under the conditions under which those people live, we might feel quite differently and might find that we had to have a social dimension or action element. It may be that we will yet find ourselves understanding that far more than we do now. If some predictions are that we're moving rapidly toward a two-tiered society where we have more people becoming wealthy, but we also have more people becoming poor, and we have a diminished or disappearing middle class. So you and I are probably going to go one direction or another there, and depending upon which direction we go, we may be more interested in social action.
Well, I'm thinking of the unemployed, sure. How many men, who had good jobs in corporations and so on, got laid off, were fired, had no job left, and found themselves being formed into small groups. We have that right in our city, and they would get together, discuss common problems, and look for solutions for one another to help keep themselves afloat, keep themselves together psychically, and to find other jobs. Well, that need brought them together. And I think that I find people crying out for that all over the place. So the whole peer group thing. So we have groups of divorced people who get together to deal with their problems. We have AA is a great example.
There's a way to interpret Jesus when he says, whenever two or three are gathered in my name,
I will be there.
Maybe the name is need.
Yeah.
Whatever the need is.
Yeah.
Whenever two or three or more are gathered in the name of need, I will be there.
Yeah. The Lord's
it seems like that people always gather in small groups when they have some need to do so.
Sometimes it seems like we organize it another way, but I think you're right, and that's when it often has the strength and vitality. Of course, other ways we do it is purposely gathering people, like the Renew program in the Diocese of Toledo, where we gather people around particular themes from the scriptures and the liturgy and so on, and have a big campaign to have that happen. And I think that
it doesn't work, does it?
Well, I think that we've had a fair amount of success. You talk to many people around this area who have had good experiences in their Renew group, but largely for the kind of reasons you said, that they were accepted as people, that they were taken seriously. I think my mother in her Renew group, she's had a marvelous experience. They've become friends, and they go to different places to pray together, to have Mass or to visit a shrine, and they've been support to one another, and I just think it's just plain the human interaction that's occurred because you put people in the same room together talking about serious matters. So I think, as a matter of fact, I think people often talk about at least three different ways in which groupings are done. One is this sort of Renew grouping I'm talking about here, where there's not a particular need or societal problem. You just gather people because it's a good thing to do and a good way to foster one's own piety and so on. Then there's the gathering around particular needs or hurts, like divorced people getting together. And I think there's much more this base community idea that's got a larger social dimension to it of how are we going to improve the society in which we live. So it looks to me like there are various types of small groups, and all of them viable, I think, and all helpful.
Well, I think Cox is looking in his book for some kind of postmodern...
I take you refer to Religion in the Secular City?
Yeah, Religion in the Secular City, the new book that Harvey Cox has just come out with.
Yeah.
Looking for some kind of postmodern theology, and it seems like he points to these base church groups as a part of what he thinks will be the postmodern, not postmortem, but postmodern theology of a new time, the time that we're heading toward right now, and perhaps is being born right now, a time when thousands of people around the world are in fact in poverty and are starving, and in that period of time, religion seems to be getting a new seems to be much more active in the world.
Yeah, I think
maybe God is more active in the world. I don't know.
I think God is always active in the world. Sometimes we're more open to it than we are on other occasions. I think Cox believes that the base community, small groups, will provide an impetus for a new way of dealing with the world, that it will help us form a new culture and a new way of relating religion and culture that will be much more integrated, that will bring into play the imaginative and emotional side of human beings as well as their rational side, and that will, again, find a way to be an influence in the political order. I find it interesting that he sees these small groups all over. There's groups in Asia, Africa, I think you indicated this before, many of them in Europe. I wasn't even aware of all of those, and he's done a lot of research and points out the widespread character of those.
Well, it seems to me like it is a way to wrestle with new realities. I mentioned to you at another point that I don't really understand the world market that we've entered, the economic market. I might understand the United States as an economic market, but I'm really confused about it as a world market. I don't know how this is all going to operate and how it's all going to work. It seems to me we're entering this a very new and revolutionary time as one world, and that as such, the small groups may really be a way for us to kind of search together in a fairly intimate setting where we can share, we have each enough airtime, and we can share what we're perceiving, and kind of trying to find our way through it all.
Well, that's well put, and helps us, I think, to wind up our discussion here, Terry, and brings together a lot of the ideas that I think we want to make sure that we see a religious dimension in all these small groups. We talked about God being present there, the Lord being present as we sort of deal with needs and so on, and with the great questions. And I think that we would like to see the workings of the Spirit in this modern movement, that the small groups have a sort of providential role to play. Man just called me up on the phone before I came here saying, again, he's in Washington, Brookings Institute, and telling me the great importance of small groups to him. And so we find it all over the place, people feeling a sense of intimacy, as you well described it, and being able to articulate their needs. And it's especially what I would like to get in, this attempt to make a difference in the world.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was the Reverend Terry Hunt, the director of Levis Square Ministries at the Trinity Episcopal Church downtown. The topic of this week's Reflections was small groups and human liberation. Comments or questions on the show or suggestions for future topics should be sent to Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Campaign of the Diocese of Toledo.